Hello, and welcome to another episode of Meet the Music. I'm your host, Tom Corley. Today's guest is a jazz philosopher and soon to be my Acharya of jazz music. And you'll know why I state that by the end of our conversation. We discovered Ethan Dodd when we were doing research for this jazz series. And he wrote an article for the Yale Daily News that really caught the attention of us here at Meet the Music. And it's the name of the title of the article is Jazz Dead? Ethan is a Yale. Are you a junior now?
Yeah, I'm
considered.
Yeah.
So Yale Junior in Jonathan Edwards College. He plays soprano, saxophone, bass clarinet, and other windwoods. He also manages and plays lead tenor saxophone in Yale Jazz Ensemble. He is interested in music's relationship to society and culture. Ethan Dodd produced his first album in 2018, Becoming by D Square, available on Spotify and Apple Music. Ethan Dodd, welcome to Meet the Music.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Tom.
My pleasure. So let's start with the article. I mean, I had read a similar article earlier in the research, and it was a guy who wrote it back. I think it was written back in 2011. I can't remember the author's name, but he initially said jazz died in 1959. So I came across your article, which was a great article, again, out of the Yale News, Daily News. So if you want to read it, it's a great article. So just fill us in on your research on it and, your conclusion and all that good stuff.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it's funny. I didn't remember that bio from my the jazz philosopher thing. That was it's pretty big. I didn't mean to say that back then, I don't think. But yeah, I wrote this article around I think I was taking the jazz history sequence at Yale, which is like kind of a new sequence being taught by a couple of professors. And I think I was in the midst of the one from 1900 to 1960. So already Jazz is Dead is not dying at 1959. It's apparently at 1960. But the second half of the sequence goes to the present, 1960 to the present. Yeah, I mean, what I'd say is jazz history extends from 1900 to the present. Or I mean, 1900 is kind of like a generic start date. But I mean, to say like what is alive or dead is kind of it's an unclear, like poorly defined term. Like we'd have to talk about what it really means for music to be alive or dead. So, yeah, it has been a minute since I've read my own article, so I'll try to base this off of as accurate a memory as I have. But I remember speaking to Wayne Escoffery, who is he's an adjunct lecturer at Yale. There's kind of a movement from the undergraduate body called the Yale Undergraduate Jazz Collective to basically make jazz more present in curricula, because there's actually a lacking of it at Yale, in part too, and kind of ironically, because the Yale School of Music, the graduate body, kind of has like a monopoly over performance on the student like curricular side of things. And so that means like, jazz lessons and ensembles are somewhat hard to come by, at least for credit. But Wayne Escoffery, he's been around, I think, thanks to the sort of the advocacy of the Undergrad Jazz Collective. They created this thing called the Yale Jazz Initiative, which has a combo program. And now the School of Music, the same graduate school, has Wayne Escoffery. He's coaching two ensembles. Another ensemble's coached by Jeff Fuller, a Yale alum and New Haven bassist. But Wayne, he teaches jazz improv. And yeah, so, I mean, I think jazz is definitely, I mean, a lot of people, there's a cultural capital that comes with saying you listen to jazz. It's seen today somewhat in a couple lights. Like some people don't want to talk about it, don't listen to it. Probably because they don't really get it. It sounds like a lot of noise, or maybe it's like kind of something you just hear in the elevator. You don't think much about. And then some people really like jazz, but perhaps for the wrong reasons. And I'd say those are the people that are like trying to hold on to that cultural capital, which it comes from kind of jazz basically becoming like a white upper class art form, leaving from where it kind of originally started as a more popular music. And then you have people who are practitioners. Like you have a lot of young people who are students, and like literal students. They go to college and stuff, and there's a growing trend in like that institutionalization of jazz. And then you have people who are from the old guard. They're playing from their own times, and you have like their influences coming from. They're probably like the last generation who played with the quote unquote greats, right? And then the young people, like people from my generation, we're kind of we're after them, and we don't exist in the same era as like Coltrane, Miles, and all the sorts of names that even Jackie McLean, like Wayne Escofree at Yale. His mentor, his main mentor, is Jackie McLean, and by extension, like you could say, like I am, through Wayne influenced by Jackie McLean. And so like there's like a level of disjunct between generations there, and so you find new influences in the present generation that are different from the old. And so I'd say that while there's mainstream jazz still going on, which is like the hard bop bent, there's still like an avant-garde bent. There's also kind of a new trend that's merging electronic music and jazz, hip hop and jazz. And yeah, I'd say that is the kind of stuff that's really, I don't know, like my generation is really tapping into, because it speaks to, like the electronic, the digital age we're living in, and also like an age of like greater, I don't know what you would call it. I suppose like awareness of like other cultures, sort of like, because I mean, you find that hip hop audiences are like very white, and you find similarly that jazz audiences are very white, but nonetheless, it's a Black art form, and there's like, so it's interesting how, I don't know, there's just like it's becoming like a more diverse art form in terms of people who are listening and playing it in like kind of an interaction, in a like a racial cultural sense that I think perhaps was harder back in like the 1960s and 50s and stuff.
So let me back up for a second. What came first, the instrument or the ear for jazz for you?
For me, well, the instrument came first. If I am being totally honest, my parents just they encouraged me when the school band was happening in like 4th or 5th grade. I didn't really think much of it at the time, but they were like, "Why don't you play an instrument?" They sent out this flyer to all the parents, and I was like, "Okay, like saxophone seems cool," and my hands were big enough or whatever, like basic like qualification you need to start at that age level. And kind of from there, my dad introduced me to a really great teacher by the name of Perry Conticchio, who he just came upon by like going to a wind shop in Gaithersburg, Maryland. And he became my teacher I still consider him a teacher, but he's a friend too. And but he became a teacher in like my teacher in 5th grade. And I don't know, he's very much where I get my like philosophy about jazz also, because he came from a very like open-minded generation where, he's influenced by like people like Anthony Braxton. And I think that's had that sort of like avant-garde kind of thing has had a influence on me and my approach to jazz as well.
Yeah. So I see you have a Kamasi Washington T-shirt on.
Yeah.
So I read an article, and in this article, and I came across something else that kind of leaned towards it also. It was saying that jazz and hip hop, well, it was basically saying hip hop was the next evolution of jazz. And I guess I can agree with that. And the person I was interviewing the other day kind of agree with that. And I think he might be just a few years older than you. But he was thinking the same thing. And the artist's name was Ambrose, and he was on Robert Glasper's trumpet player on Robert Glasper's one of LPs. And when he was interviewed, he said that, yeah, I think jazz and hip hop are the same. And and when I think about it, when Robert Glasper put out his first CD on Blue Note, a jazz label, but he wins a Grammy for R&B for that same sound. So how do you feel about the evolution of jazz? And like you said, for your generation, you guys are being influenced by I guess today's artists. And in addition to you're performing, great hits from Coltrane and Sonny Rollins and whoever else that you guys are, tapping into as a bass.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think the influences they just grow. And as a result, the art form, it can go in many different directions. And, but yeah, I definitely agree that hip hop has like a huge influence on the current movement in jazz. And it's hard to we can say that there are multiple directions, but really it's I don't know. It's like a river with many different, I don't know what you call streams, going from it rather than, but even those streams reconnect with each other. So I think electronic music is also a really big area that's growing, and that has similar roots or tendencies as jazz. But that also merges with hip hop. That also merges with alternative rock. There's a lot of different. But I do think hip hop for sure has it's a big force in the current direction of jazz.
Yeah, the blending, I guess, of genre. Well, let's say, for instance, the blending of genres are leading to experimentation. And with jazz being a heavily improvising genre, things are being introduced. I mean, Herbie Hancock's, kind of, start of the jazz fusion genre in the early 70s, was kind of frowned upon by those who played, in the 60s, or the traditional thing.
Right.
So, but one of the artists that you had on your list is Sungazer.
Yeah.
And they had Fear, and I have never been familiar with them. And again, like I said, I appreciate you introducing me to them, because I kind of been out of the loop, I guess, to miss that. But electronic music is in there, and a little hip hop is in there also.
Yeah.
So it's called Drunk. So our listeners, if you're curious, you go tap into them. Do you think the next evolution will be catch fire, I guess, just to say, because seemed like every evolution of it, of jazz kind of caught fire for a while. And, especially with young people, with the bebop scene, that was a popular music at the time. So I guess, for our listeners is concerned, because I know the pipeline is being fed by schools, universities, high schools or whatever, having these art classes, and people are getting into it. But my thing is with this show, the mission, I guess, is to get more listeners more audiences, people to attend more concerts, live performances. So,
I mean, young people don't listen to jazz in the numbers that older people do, right? I don't think that's like an unknown kind of statement. Like in my high school, we would have talent shows. Like the talent show was like a big thing every year, and there was always like our high school happens to have like a good jazz band and a lot of like a good jazz culture, I'd say. This is Walt Whitman High School in Bethesda, Maryland, if anyone's listening from there. And and I'd say the student body was into the sort of acts that were the quote unquote like jazz acts. There were like there would be like one or two, and with each annual instantiation of the festival. And I don't know, like I did like a version of Caravan for my senior in high school, and like that audience is virtually all students, like, and it's students and parents and that kind of thing. But people love that sort of like virtuosic kind of like they get lost in the notes that are passing by, but also like lost in a good way. It's not like they're confused or something. And we were basing it off of the movie Whiplash. My drummer from that, Vivek, Nathan, he kind of transcribed the beginning of the Whiplash solo from the Caravan solo from the movie Whiplash. And so we were deliberately, trying to connect to a more popular audience in the way we were doing it. And I kind of stole like a Brecker Brothers, kind of like breakdown section to change up the song midway through, and like that kind of like brought it down to like two chords, and kind of like a funk like a funk rhythm kind of going on with the drums and bass and that kind of thing. I think people really tap into, and so young people definitely tap into that. But I'd say the talent show experience where there's like a young audience is kind of the exception. Most gigs I end up playing, again, like I haven't played that many gigs, but and most of them aren't like real performance gigs, but of the gigs that I performed, the audience, it is largely older people, 40s, 50s. But in the Yale Undergraduate Jazz Collective, our audiences at Yale have been super diverse in age. They do tend to be older sometimes, but I don't know. I remember talking to a parent and who had brought his son, and I was kind of like, it brought a tear to my eye. I was like, this is real cute, like an intergenerational like sharing of the the music that you like with your kid at a very young age, and just bringing them. I think that was at actually a performance with one of the guys on the list I sent you, Nate Smith, as our headliner. It was, and that was a sold out audience, basically, that I would say was pretty diverse in age. But yeah, for the most part, you do end up getting older folks coming to the sort of like cocktail gigs or the
right.
Whatever party gig it is.
I was having a conversation with the president of the Detroit Jazz Festival, and I asked him about growing audiences, and two things that his mission to do while he's the head of the festival is, one was to kind of have a connection, intergenerational, so. He told me a story about how a fan brought his grandson to the festival, and the reason why they did that is because they had Common on stage with Kenny Riggins, I think, and I don't think Washington was there on that stage, but he was there that weekend. So it was an opportunity for the young kid to explain to his older relative the whole scene about Common, what Common was about, and it was an opportunity for the older relative to explain to the younger cat about this whole jazz scene. Right. And so I thought that was a great way to try to grow the audience. And the other thing was he noticed that within the community where they're at in the Detroit area, there's a large Latino community, and a lot of them weren't frequently the festivals. So he arranged for buses to be sent out for them to come to those performances to try to grow the audience. And so that's kind of what I, think are great ideas to, try to grow the audience. Now, these festivals have, 400,000 people. I mean, more in attendance to these festivals than you would a Super Bowl game. Now, of course, viewership for a Super Bowl game can reach the 100 millions because it's a worldwide thing. But because of the COVID, the Detroit Jazz Festival broadcast, and they were able to grow their viewership or listeners or whatever. They were able to grow it from the regular 300, 400,000 to close to 1 million, which I thought was fantastic. And that was, of course, worldwide. So I just thought that was fantastic. And I think that's a great idea, in order for audiences to grow or people to appreciate the music to grow, is that we got to get it out there. And I think now, unfortunately, because of the COVID, but I think, video, live performances through Zoom or whatever, can get pushed out and people can see it, by the millions. So now let's just go ahead and transition into your list and give us an idea of why you made those particular selections. Now, granted, I noticed that you have a few greats, but you don't have a lot of greats. Which has surprised me because I was talking to a guy in Montreal from the McGill University, and he's the Schulich School of Music, and he kind of broke his list up into classical and new classical. And you guys did feature one artist. You both selected Esperanza, and then which was kind of cool. But surprisingly, when I didn't think about it, when I think about jazz, I think about, in all kind of fashions. But he also, and you did too, you added a vocalist to your list. So I thought that was pretty eye-opening for myself. But once you run through your list and give us an idea of why you selected the songs that you did.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I know how biased I am from my own ears. My influences tend to be like somewhat avant-garde or somewhat like mixed with classical. Like I'm a big fan of Philip Glass, and also listen to a lot of modern jazz, but also a combination with like Coltrane and stuff, and then older cats. So I was trying to make a list that would introduce to kind of the history of jazz, but mostly to I kind of started revising it more as I thought about it, and actually talking with my roommate. Yeah. I was like, probably should lower the number of old songs and try to connect to the younger generation, who are the people who are less familiar with kind of the modes of older jazz, and who would probably better connect with like Sungazer or Knee Body. And so I'll run through the list, but I mean this is hardly an exhaustive list of the best jazz out there, but I
get it. I totally agree. But like I said, it's just a matter of you're going to a dinner party and you meet somebody that you've never met before, and instead of the small talk, you go into a conversation about jazz, and they'll say, "Okay, I've never really taken an opportunity to listen to jazz," and then you just go into your list and say, "Hey, I happen to have a list."
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. I mean, like, if I was trying to persuade someone that they really should listen to jazz, I would first try to figure out what kind of music they already listen to, and kind of work from there, and try to, because like jazz is so diverse that it will connect, like I think virtually with any kind of ear tendency of that person already. So. But here, I can run through these and give a little background. As much as I'm not, even though I still can't believe I put that as my bio. Though I say I'm a jazz philosopher, back when I was maybe a first year, sophomore, one of those. I'm not a jazz historian, but I'll do my best, you know. So the first song on the list, I wanted to start with some classics. So Sugar Hill Penthouse, I actually played in a youth orchestra in high school called the Blues Alley Youth Orchestra, and which is Blues Alley is probably the oldest jazz club in DC, and they have it's a nonprofit now also, and Michael Bowie is the director, a great bass player, and he leads the.
Is that down in Georgetown?
Yeah, in Georgetown.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And he leads the big band there, and you know we though sometimes we have trouble filling all the spots because it's an extracurricular band, you know, merging from students from schools in Virginia, Maryland, DC. You know, we still are able to play really great music, and Sugar Hill Penthouse was one of the songs I remember distinctly because it's a Duke Ellington chart who was kind of like in a way, probably the first like jazz aristocrat sort of, in a way. He conveyed a sort of virtue in his media presence. If you watch interviews with him, he's well spoken, and he smiles a lot. He charms the camera, but his playing is also gorgeous in both his solo playing. I would have put on this list Single Petal of a Rose. His playing on that and is done on bass clarinet and stuff too is great. But Sugar Hill Penthouse kind of combines. What I'd say is it's a good example of what jazz became in the late 20s and 30s, and continued with Duke's bands and other bands, you know, through the 60s, 70s even, which was big band jazz, largely arranged. You know, you have three major horn sections: saxophone, trombone, trumpet. You have a rhythm section that you know, starts usually with piano. Duke plays piano, but you know, bass player, drums, sometimes guitar, and I think Duke. He's probably there's a reason why there's an essentially Ellington festival out there, and it's because he's kind of like the king of jazz. Though I know there's like proper terms, like pops is like I don't know if he's like technically the king of jazz. That might not be the word to give him, because that could belong to someone else, like Louis Armstrong.
Right.
But he's like one of the big players whose music has, you know, gone across many generations and styles, and Sugar Hill Penthouse is a great example of swing kind of merged with like almost a classical sensibility, where it's highly arranged, but it still feels very I don't know, like spontaneous in the moment. And Harry Carney, one of, you know, Ellington would write pieces to feature you know, people in his band that were exceptional. And Harry Carney, a baritone saxophonist, he features on Sugar Hill Penthouse. And you don't really hear bari sax a lot, but this is a really beautiful, you know, ballad around Carney. And but again, I want to de-emphasize the soloist in a way, because even though Harry Carney, the melody is written, you know, it's featuring him. So big band music is more about the collective and that arranged collective rather than the soloist. Though there are soloists and there's improvisation and that sort of thing, it kind of changes when you get to smaller groups. And so like the second song on my list is Moanin' by Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. And so Blakey also is someone who's been around for generations. He's a drummer. He I think he's gone through many generations of jazz musicians from probably like the 50s onwards to, I think he passed probably in the 80s. But he's had amazing names in his groups. Like I think Wayne Shorter was part of his group. at times. Benny Golson is in Moanin', like Lee Morgan's in here. I think Freddie Hubbard played with Blakey. All of them were at times, emerging artists in their own right. And he kind of, in his group, brought them into the like into their solo careers. And I'd say that between him and Duke, you're covering a huge history, a huge swath of jazz. So that's kind of why I thought these guys would be really good artists to just introduce people to. And Moanin' the song is a really bluesy. I think it's a good example of kind of small group jazz, hard bop jazz, which is it's not bebop in that.
I wanted to just drop a note here is that I saw an interview with Kamasi just recently, and he had made mention of Art Blakey and mentioned that the fact that that's what steered him from the street life, if you want to put it that way, to music. And it captured him, and he became obsessed with, at a young age, jazz. And Art Blakey was the artist that kind of did that for him.
Yeah. Yeah. Blakey's music is really captivating. It's really energetic. It's and intense also. His group is it's almost always, I don't think I've ever heard a vocalist, and it's not to say like vocalists aren't intense and energetic and that sort of thing, but there's a kind of intensity you get from having instrumentalists, kind of like, you could problematize it by saying it's hyper masculine or something, but the kind of music is like Moanin', even though it's a slower tempo than some other Blakey pieces. It's I think it's really emotive, and I think that's probably what got Kamasi into it, and into if that was what brought him off the streets, then it makes sense to me. Lush Life. I think a lot of people have trouble with the fact that jazz is instrumental largely, or has become instrumental. So I was like, okay, we better find a song that can connect to people, and they're like hearing.
Excellent choice too.
Oh, great. Like, lyrics are well appreciated. So Lush Life, I think is written by Billy Strayhorn. So not one of the typical, don't quote me on that, but I think it is. I think it is. But he's not like one of the typical, like, songwriters you'd hear like Gershwin or Porter, whatever from the 30s, 20s songbook era. But this is like nonetheless a really just beautiful lyrics. I think it's kind of like a lonely love song in a way. And Johnny Hartman has these deep baritone vocals that pair really nicely with Coltrane on tenor, and you'll hear that it ends up giving this kind of, I say it's like a classy dark room kind of vibe, but you could listen to this. Is perhaps what a lot of people picture when they think of jazz. Like, this is perhaps where the cultural capital of jazz comes from, where you kind of turn it on and you might feel you might want to be going for like a kind of, I don't know, sophisticated vibe, or and there's nothing wrong with that. People can do that, but I think the song gives that kind of that vibe.
That brings me, I mean, not to cut you off, but I saw a documentary on Herb Albert. Herb Albert mentioned that he received a letter from a young lady someplace in Europe probably, and she said, thank you for introducing me to Mexico, because that's what she got from the Tijuana Brass. When he played, that's what she envisioned. So, again, I mean, you're the artist, and I'm just an audience. But that's sometimes, I put a picture with music sometimes to appreciate it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. yeah, the visual element, I think, I mean, that's why I'm a big fan of films and kind of the music of Philip Glass, because it's often paired with like sound. It's often a soundtrack accompanying something very, visually oriented.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of modern jazz is kind of a lot of like Kamasi and I think Esperanza to an extent. Julian Lage has a music video. Like a lot of those players are now either like producing music videos or just showing themselves playing live, and I think that does give another in an era where jazz is more and more digital, and therefore like theoretically like less spontaneous. It still gives that room, being in the room vibe that is, I think, pretty central to it. That it's made on the spot. It's intimate music, but even between the players in the group and the listener and the player. So,
yeah. So number 4 surprised me.
Yeah.
How did that make the list?
So, for one thing, I think I wanted to include a big influence of mine from over the years, who's Michael Brecker, and he happens to be in the band on this, and so does a number of other famous jazz musicians. Like we got.
Well, that's when I saw the list. Okay, I said, okay, this is why you might have selected it. And I saw Pat Metheny's name and I saw Lyle Miles' name on it. I was like, oh, my favorite.
Yeah, Jaco Pastorius too. He's on here, and John Elias on percussion. It's a powerhouse band, and I was like, Joni Mitchell being, this is probably the first example, not the first example, but like on this list, it's the first example of jazz meeting, like really tapping into like a sort of pop sense. Because Joni Mitchell was I'm not extremely familiar with her music, but like, a folk artist that was very popular in the
right. Yeah.
70s, 80s. So like, I think this is a great way to, attract people who would not normally, be listening to Jaco or Pat Metheny or Michael Brecker, all those people. But nonetheless, she's influenced by them. They're influenced by her. They're playing on the same stage in this concert. It's a live concert. I think it's also on YouTube if people want to check the whole thing out. It's called Shadows and Light from 1980. And Hajira, I think, is one of Jaco's compositions. But it's different also than the previous like it's different from Lush Life, Moanin', Sugar Hill. It's not swinging in the same way. It's not swinging in a technical sense, It's a very like laid back kind of the rhythm is less, or maybe it's hard to say really, but the rhythm is like less defined. It has a kind of an openness and I don't know, less definition, but for the benefit of like letting new sounds come in that are kind of like ambient. And you can hear that in the soprano playing by Brecker, and the melodic comping of Jaco's bass and his like overtones and all that. Like it's a really beautiful song, and Joni Mitchell's singing is beautiful also. So it all goes really nice blend.
Yeah, it kind of captures, well, it kind of reminds me of something from when I was listening to jazz in my teenage years. I don't know if you're familiar with a guy named Gino Vanelli, but he's a Canadian, and he was categorized genre-wise as a rock and blue-eyed soul.
Mm.
But I was introduced to him on a jazz radio station.
Mm-hmm.
And because he was using synthesizers and it was his mix, and our interpretation of it for the jazz station to play him was what the thing that caught my attention, that he is not even traditionally a jazz performer. So, but yeah, so that blending that makes sense to me, and to get people to come over like a crossroad from folk to jazz. I think that was a excellent experiment they did, and it worked.
Yeah. No, I To just add like one more point, perhaps like perhaps your instinct when you saw this like Hijira by Joni Mitchell, perhaps you didn't associate her with jazz at first, but I don't know, like that's been my experience in a class or two at taking a jazz courses at Yale. I mean, she isn't like considered like part of the like jazz canon, but I think she's very much she is a jazz musician. She is part of the tradition, having played with Mingus, made an album titled Mingus. You know, like I think she bends the definition that we're used to, and perhaps that's a way to make jazz more inclusive of women also, because as you'll see on the list there, I mean, I wanted to include as many women as possible, but that you can only do that so far because jazz has been traditionally played by men oftentimes, but jazz has a feminist history, a queer history, that often goes, because of prejudices in society, goes unnoticed, or it discourages people, you know, from who would want to be part of the tradition. You know, the fact is, if you say like Joni Mitchell's not a jazz musician, well, why? You know, like you really got to make a case for that, considering like what she's done and who she played with. So even though her music might have lyrics in it, it might often be on country and folk melodies and stuff. Like I don't know. I think she belongs in the jazz sphere as much as, you know, mainstream players. So
that song does it for me.
Yeah.
So number 5.
Sure. Yeah. So I know, you know, I thought, you know, people would just tap right into this. I think this is on Esperanza's debut album. She's a bassist and vocalist, and a lot of her music now taps into like alt rock and kind of it gives like an existential vibe. She does like chamber music with some groups and stuff. And she's a professor, I think, at Berkeley. But she's young and she's really changing the scene. And I know, you know, is kind of like a mix of like funk, but there's like Latin in there. The whole album, Esperanza, the debut album, I recommend. And just again, if for people who want to hear lyrics and that'll help them get into jazz, is a great way to do that. I'll just like keep going. I'm not really sure how to say this next one. I think it's Maisha or Meisha, which means so long, I think, in Portuguese. And originally was a Miles Davis tune, but I wanted to include something by Robert Glasper while also hitting on something that was directly or tangentially from Latin America, because a lot of like jazz is a global art form as much as it's an American art form nowadays. So taking on Glasper does something where he kind of takes the original song, which I think wasn't as much of a hit, honestly, as this one, but Miles is still great. I'm not knocking Miles, but this is in tribute to Miles, and Robert Glasper, who's very much has hip hop influences in his own jazz playing, as we already talked about. He does like a kind of a bossa hip hop feel with Erykah Badu, who sings over top, and it's kind of like in ways it might be off-putting to the ear immediately, because she has a particular way of singing that's like I mean, like the song.
It is so funny you say that, because that's what happened to me.
Yeah. She has a thing that's like almost deliberately like out of tune at first or something that you know, it throws your ear off, but it also hits on some strings. If you let it in, it can really pull you emotionally. So I thought that'd be a cool song, and it has Robert Glasper, great piano solo on there. I think electric piano. But I think that's a good example of boundary blurring music from this generation. That's even, you know, it's a going back to a Miles Davis composition. So, and then next up, and all these songs now are from like 2009 onwards. I wanted to pick music that was like taking influences from this generation, this age, to connect with new listeners more so. And this next one is Nocturne by Julian Lage. on his album Arclight. And I play this for friends who are musicians, but not necessarily jazz musicians, who say, for instance, are just like country or rock guitarists who would be interested in this kind of vibe. And it's it seems almost country, but it's also rock. It's highly virtuosic. I definitely recommend. It's virtuosic, but not trying to be in your face about it. It's very laid back and I don't know, like content with itself, I'd say. And I just recommend Nocturne to almost any new listener. Then next is Disenchantment, The Weight, featuring Amawat. And this was actually sung. I was trying to think of a good hip hop influence or hip hop influenced jazz musician to bring in on this list. Besides Robert Glasper, and I thought, Nate Smith, because the Yale Undergraduate Jazz Collective, we brought him in as our headliner, and he played this song with Amawat and singing, and Jaleel Shaw on saxophone. His band was here in 2019 for our festival, and I remember being thrown. I actually wasn't super familiar with Nate Smith at that point, and I was blown away with this kind of music. Amawat is singing with a really breathy vocal. That's I don't know. Some people might not like. Again, it's like she does like her own self-expression, where it's not a traditional way of singing. She might do like a nasally kind of singing at points, or a very breathy singing at points. But that brings out different. It opens up the possible emotions and moods available. And I think she does it masterfully. Nate Smith is a drummer, super skilled, and you can hear that on this song. Also, Jaleel Shaw's saxophone solo, it goes quote unquote out, where he's not playing to the traditional changes, but it fits really well. And I don't know, I think this is a good example of music that could connect with a wide range of listeners outside of jazz. And the last two are of a strain that I have on this list, are a strain of jazz that perhaps is less talked about, but I think is still really important, is kind of like the alternative rock, electronic area of jazz, which Kneebody, I forgot how I came across Kneebody, but their saxophonist Ben Wendell has become very famous in jazz circles. He's also a bassoonist and classically trained, I think, somewhat, and that's influenced the way he plays. Very technical and virtuosic again, but his music has a very it has like its own sophisticated kind of vibe to it that but it also blends with hip hop. I don't know, alternative rock, I've kind of said that. And For the Fallen is by his group Kneebody, which I think was a college group. I forget where he went, might have been somewhere in New York. But I think For the Fallen is a great way for people who listen to alternative rock to tap into jazz and realize that like it's like instrumental alternative rock in a way, but has improvised solos on it. And I think you would get that it has like that kind of ambient grungy sound to it in its being electronic or using electronic instruments heavily, or distorted mic'd saxophone, trumpet, that sort of thing. And then Drunk by Sungazer. I had to put Sungazer on here because I think Adam Neely, who's a huge YouTube sensation, the same with Sean Crowder, a little less so, but they're both big YouTubers who explain jazz or jazz music and music theory, and kind of combine it with there's like a meme culture around jazz that altogether I think is also tapping into a different segment of my generation, and I think has a huge influence on what people are listening to. And so I figured I should put something that they've made, and I think Drunk is also a really great example of electronic digital music. That is my generation and generations after mine are going to be heavily like technologized, or whatever word you want to use. So this music's using and playing to playing to that generational mode. With they're a duo, but I think Neely plays bass and keys synthesizer on this, and Sean Crowder is playing drums, but I think he's playing drums with a tap board, or I don't know what you formally call it. I'm not a drummer, but it's kind of like what you'd see at an EDM show, where you can incorporate sounds from your computer or something that wouldn't be possible acoustically, and it's like sampling from sampling unusual sounds that might not be placed in traditional jazz.
Yeah. I listened to it twice and I liked it. And I again appreciate you introducing this list, because it opened my eyes, and like I said, I had kind of gotten out of the loop on music because I had been down the dial a little bit listening to Kenny Chesney and kind of country music for a while. And then I kind of dialed back, and then I started this project, and I said, well, I'm just so out of the loop now, and I can tell by looking at these lists, I'd never heard of some of these people. So, but I think that what you've done here is fantastic, because it hits right on point. What I'm trying to do with this podcast is give people a taste of how they can enjoy a new sound for their ears. And I you may not accept the philosopher title, but you got to accept the Achira title, because you are now my musical guide.
Well, that's very generous. Well, how about, because I feel like I didn't do justice to, I guess, your initial inquiry into my article. I'm trying to, as we've been talking, is like going over this list has made me think about like the key points from that. I could kind of go over that real quickly, if that.
Sure.
Yeah. So
go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of this list, what I was trying to get at, is the diversity of jazz. And though a lot of the music is from the present generation, I think every generation of jazz has seen a variety of genres being played at once. And so we're given this kind of idea that jazz has a linear progression. Life and death is also this linear progression. But what's funny is, like, we take even though we might not think about it, and our present is influenced by the past incredibly, and we might just not be aware of it in the moment. And so every influence that we're taking up, from the 30s or 40s in our 50s, it's still there. It just might not be super audible or immediately audible. And what this list is, I'm hoping to do is show that all these artists are taking their various influences that might not come from the original source of jazz, but they nonetheless intersect with and push forward kind of the lifeblood of jazz. And so instead of understanding jazz as this originating from like a fixed set of elements, jazz, the birthplace of jazz is New Orleans, right? And the common narrative is that it has to have swing, it has to have solo improvisation, it kind of has to hit all these markers. But what I think the real, this is at the cost of ambiguity and kind of overextending jazz. But I think the real definition of jazz is often isn't really so much about these elements, but it's about a certain like character and that the artist takes and the listener takes, and like what one would call a vibe about self-expression, and perhaps you're beholden to certain parameters around like the chord changes on a song or the melody that you're playing. But each generation gets its new melodies. So it once was songbooks, it was songbook tunes, then it became jazz standards in their own right, contrafacts, and then new compositions from jazz musicians themselves. And then, jazz musicians throughout their the whole lifetime of jazz have been drawing from outside the genre. I think I personally am drawn to, at this point in my life, to music that is not jazz, that I'm taking my jazz training and sensibility to wanting to play music that is, I'm not even from the 90s, but I'm from watching The Sopranos. Like, who knows where these influences come from? But from watching The Sopranos, I got introduced to Los Lobos, like a 90s alternative rock band,
Right.
and all those sorts of influences end up, making, just connecting these seemingly disparate things. And you find a similar self-expression across all these musics that make it, perhaps American music or modern music, and so I think the risk of defining jazz so narrowly is that you unnecessarily shut it off to people who it kind of says, like, I don't know what purpose, honestly, it ends up serving, because when you want to define jazz super narrowly, like it helps, it clears up things, and it provides a certain clarity. But as you point to concrete examples, even from within the jazz canon, that might not, like, a lot of big band jazz is highly arranged. It doesn't have a lot of improvisation necessarily. Even a lot of, like, combo jazz can sometimes be like that. Is that jazz? It kind of throws a wrench in the definition if jazz is supposed to have sort of improvisation. And I think, but what all these artists are capturing is a certain group sensibility, a sort of spontaneity, and a freedom of expression that comes about, that I think are probably pivotal and more flexible, elements than, say, having a particular type of rhythm, like swing rhythm, or all these sorts of things. And so, like, hip hop is another example. Like, rhythm has changed considerably over the last century, but I think hip hop swings in its own way, as funk has swung, as rock swing. All these genres, they all swing. It's just not. It's not that triplet with it's not like the way of notating, like, swing for a high school big band score. Like, it's swing is just it's more about a feeling. It's not about this specific notation. And I think when we get lost in that notation, that's a sign that we're closing jazz off and institutionalizing it in ways that are not good for its life force, and perhaps losing relevance to the current state of jazz. So people who are, I'm not trying to decry jazz education, but I think jazz education needs to, as much as notation and theorizing are important, it can't be at the expense of abstracting jazz to the point that it's not what is played anymore. And because jazz in that form is very much alive. But if we're constraining jazz to being, certain things written on a page, and perhaps that are listened to, but these certain elements that are no longer practiced as they once were, but they might be practiced now in a new form, extended or rearranged. But if we constrain jazz to that, then yeah, you could say it's dead. But that's not what jazz means, in my opinion. I don't think music's going to die as long as it has new generations taking their new influences to it and allowing it to grow. So that's kind of my 2 cents about about jazz there. But
Spoken like a true jazz philosopher. Way to close out, my friend. I appreciate that. So, are you on social media?
yeah, somewhat.
Okay, so go ahead and give yourself a plug, and then also, are you working on anything musically?
I'm a bad jazz musician, because my major this isn't my fault. Yale doesn't have a jazz studies program, but I'm playing as much music as I can here. But I haven't. High school was the only time I ever really got to record something, and I'm not so. I was in high school. Please be forgiving if you listen to it. But yeah, like I'm basically a public policy major in college.
Are you going to stick? You're going to stick with that, huh?
Yeah, we might end up. I don't know. There might be a way to bring jazz into public policy. We'll see about that. But
Yeah.
I think I've been working on. And unfortunately, it's kind of COVID is preventing it. But making a group that would allow me, as I was talking about earlier, taking that sort of jazz training that a number of other Yale students have, in the members of the Jazz Collective who are big jazz musicians. But we want to take our jazz sensibility and training to what would reach new audiences, be popular with our class, our generation, and that means blending with hip hop, techno. And I recently bought I'm so influenced by like Ben Wendell. I bought a pedal and microphone. The microphone I'm using right now is for that setup, to amplify and distort my saxophone playing, to get new sounds that get that existential angsty grunge vibe of alternative rock, or make infinite loops that are similar to something you'd hear from like a Philip Glass minimalist composition. So like a whole ton I don't know what I'm in the end trying to do with it all, but I'm just trying to be me musically, and jazz is a really flexible art form that allows me to do that. So I'm a proud jazz musician in that, right? As for my social media, I don't have a very public presence. I do have a Twitter, but I don't really have anything on there. But feel free to email me at ethan.dodd@yale.edu. I'm happy to email and chat. Dodd is DODD, 3 Ds, if you want to do that. And make sure to check out the Yale Undergraduate Jazz Collective. We have our own website, yujc.org. We're an aspiring nonprofit. We're trying to also, kind of like the Detroit Jazz Festival you mentioned. Like, I think in the end, we might end up extending into like a live stream territory, because that's a way we can expand our audience, reach alumni who don't live in New Haven anymore, but also reach audiences that just don't live in New Haven, in the Connecticut area. So it's a great way to make sure that jazz is reaching, because it's a niche art form, but there are people who listen to it all over the place. You just gotta expand that reach until you find those people. And if you give them a way to reach it, and the internet's a great way to do that, then they'll listen to it. You just gotta help them with that mode of communicating. So yeah.
I think that's great. I think that's fantastic. Well, Ethan Dodd, my fellow, not fellow, because I'm nowhere near this, but my Icella, my guiding light to jazz music. I appreciate your time, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for having me. This was really fun.